And our headlines on this Thursday afternoon, July 13th, here in South Korea. The country's central bank decides to maintain its key interest rate at 3.5% for the fourth session in a row amid prolonged economic uncertainties beyond borders. Meanwhile, in Lithuania, President Yoon urges a greater united front with NATO against Pyongyang's provocations and calls on his Japanese counterpart for joint efforts to ease public concerns here over Fukushima wastewater plants. And North Korea earlier on this Thursday confirms its test firing of a Hwasong-18 solid-fuel intercontinental ballistic missile towards the East Sea back on Wednesday under the guidance of its leader, Kim Jong-un. President Yoon Suk-yeol is in Poland and poised to meet with his Polish counterpart Andrzej Duda on Thursday to address a diverse spectrum of bilateral interests. Upon arrival on Wednesday, President Yoon sat down with Korean expats in Warsaw and highlighted the strategic partnership shared by the two countries given their expanding trade ties. Traveling with a delegation of 89 corporate leaders, President Yoon is expected to seek greater collaboration in high-tech technologies as well as in the construction sector in line with plans to rebuild Ukraine. Prior to his departure for Poland, President Yoon Suk-yeol met with his Japanese counterpart Fumio Kishida on the margins of the NATO summit in Lithuania and addressed public concerns here over the Fukushima radioactive wastewater discharge plan. Our top office correspondent Kim Do-yeon reports.
Sitting down with his Japanese counterpart Fumio Kishida on the sidelines of the NATO summit on Wednesday, President Yoon Suk-yeol made three requests to further ensure the safety of South Koreans ahead of the planned release of Fukushima nuclear power plant wastewater. The first, that Japan share the release's monitoring results in real time with South Korea. The second, that South Korean experts be part of the monitoring team. And finally, that Japan halts the release process if the concentration of radioactive materials surpasses standards. Yoon also said he respects the IAEA's recent report that the release plan meets international standards, but re-emphasized that the health and safety of South Koreans are the utmost priority. According to the top office, Kishida said there won't be any release that threatens the health of people in South Korea or Japan and promised transparency and real-time communications. However, the Japanese government didn't make a clear announcement on whether South Korea's request to be part of the monitoring team will be accepted. Despite the sensitive issue, the two leaders embraced their newly improved relationship. The two last met just a month and a half ago, and both said the resumption of more direct diplomacy is bearing fruit.
함께 노력한 결과 한일 양국 관계는 개선과 발전의 방향으로 지금 움직이고 있습니다. 저는 한일 양국이 협력하여 영내 평화와 번영, 글로벌 현안 해결에 크게 기여할 수 있다고 믿습니다.
As President Yoon and I have opened a new era for the two countries, there has been progress in various different types of cooperation in both government and private sectors.
According to the top office, the leaders also spoke about economic exchanges, which have resumed since the normalization of the relationship, with Japan relisting South Korea on its white list for trade. The two promised more official channels to further foster bilateral trade. In the meantime, they also used the opportunity to condemn North Korea's missile provocation from earlier in the day and promised to cooperate further on that issue. They also mentioned the three-way cooperation with the U.S. and pledged to continue working closely for security in the region. In fact, such a meeting is in the pipeline in the next month or two, with a Seoul, Washington, Tokyo trilateral summit already agreed. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Now, along with his summit with the Japanese Prime Minister, President Yoon sat down for a total of 13 one-on-ones with his counterparts in Europe and those from the Asia-Pacific, seeking to strengthen trade security amid geopolitical uncertainty. Our Lee Soo-jin has details.
South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol continues to pursue sales diplomacy. He attended 13 bilateral meetings during the NATO summit in Lithuania in an effort to strengthen the supply chain for key high-tech industries such as semiconductors and to expand into new markets.
This NATO summit had the largest number of bilateral talks with 13. Notably, 8 of them were the first bilateral meeting since the inauguration of President Yoon, and it is expected to be a starting point for creating new achievements in the future.
Yoon's meeting with Lithuania's President Nausėda on Wednesday was significant in terms of securing supply chains in the advanced tech industry, especially as the nation is a global leader in laser tech that's essential for ultra-precision and ultra-micro processing of semiconductors. During the summit, both Yoon and Nausėda said they hope to expand cooperation between companies of both respective countries in the advanced tech sector. The Lithuanian president also expressed interest in South Korea's advanced weapons systems such as self-propelled artillery. President Yoon also met with the Prime Minister of the Netherlands on Tuesday to strongly encourage Dutch semiconductor equipment company ASML to invest in Korea. ASML is the maker of the world's top DUV lithography systems and is known to be currently considering building a DUV manufacturing plant in Asia. Yoon promised incentives such as financial support and tax deductions. As for expanding into new markets, South Korea is mainly trying to boost exports of nuclear power plants, arms, and infrastructure.
President Yoon explained the advantages of Korean-made nuclear power plants to the heads of the Netherlands, Hungary, Romania, and Sweden, all nations that have plans to build new nuclear power plants and also offered cooperation on the nuclear front.
The top office also said that it would put in its best efforts to work with relevant ministries and companies to systematically follow up with the agenda items discussed during the summit to produce meaningful results. 이수진, Arirang News.
Beyond his bilateral engagements in Lithuania, President Yoon addressed broader challenges to global peace and stability by shedding grave light on North Korea's alarming provocations and by pledging greater support for the cause in Ukraine. Our senior presidential correspondent Oh Soo-young reports from Vilnius.
President Yoon has called for stronger condemnation and response to North Korea's nuclear and missile provocations as he addressed world leaders at a meeting of NATO countries in Lithuania extended to invited nations. Noting that North Korea's missiles reach could extend beyond its neighbouring countries to cities like London, Paris and Berlin, Yoon on Wednesday warned that Pyongyang's actions threaten global peace and security. On that note, the South Korean leader expressed appreciation for NATO's condemnation of Pyongyang's nuclear weapons program in a joint communiqué released the previous day, which also calls for North Korea's complete, verifiable and irreversible denuclearization. NATO's statement in 2022 did not include North Korea, and the alliance has not issued a joint condemnation of the regime's nuclear and missile program since 2018. During his speech, Yoon also renewed Seoul's support for Ukraine, currently provided in the form of humanitarian aid and non-lethal weapons. The president emphatically promised that he and South Koreans will stand with Ukrainians until the day when their freedom is fully restored, and pledged to contribute to the NATO-Ukraine trust funds towards building Kyiv's resilience. Furthermore, reflecting on Seoul's new bilateral partnership program with NATO adopted Tuesday, covering 11 areas of cooperation, Yoon highlighted cyber cooperation and expanding military intel sharing as vital areas going forward, with South Korea to establish an international cyber training center. A senior presidential official told reporters, Seoul is also expected to work closely with NATO on the organization's system that collects and utilizes military intelligence among member countries. Increasing its participation in information exchanges could provide insights for Seoul on sharing nuclear-related intelligence with the United States, as the two allies create and operate a nuclear consultation group to counter North Korea's growing belligerence. On that note, President Yoon stressed that the growing use of digital media and cyberspace are being leveraged by authoritarian forces, whose unhesitant use of war violence and manipulation of public opinion challenge international norms. He called for nations with common universal values to cooperate more firmly in solidarity, saying Indo-Pacific and Atlantic security issues cannot be separated. On that note, Yoon on Wednesday moderated the second meeting of NATO's 4 Asia-Pacific partners, Japan, Australia and New Zealand.
Yoon's office says the AP4 leaders agreed to work more closely with NATO and Pacific Island countries, as well as bolster cooperation on supply chain diversity and resilience and cybersecurity. 오수영 Arirang News Vilnius.
Here on the peninsula, North Korea on this Thursday morning confirmed its launch of a Hwasong-18 solid-fuel ICBM earlier on Wednesday. The test launch was reportedly overseen by its leader Kim Jong-un. My colleague Choi Min-jung has this latest.
North Korea confirmed that it test-fired its Hwasong-18 solid-fuel ICBM on Wednesday under the watchful eye of leader Kim Jong-un. This marks the regime's second launch of the Hwasong-18 after its first test launch in April. The North state-run news agency, the KCNA, on Thursday reported that the intercontinental ballistic missile flew around 1,000 kilometers for more than 74 minutes at an altitude of over 6,600 kilometers before landing in the East Sea. Analysts say that when fired at a lower angle, the ICBM can fly more than 15,000 kilometers, meaning it could potentially hit the United States. The Hwasong-18 is also known to be harder to detect and intercept than liquid-fuel ICBMs. And according to North Korean media, Kim has vowed to take a series of stronger military offensive actions until the U.S. and South Korea admit and give up their hostile policy against the regime. Pyongyang also noted that the launch came at a grave period when the security situation on the Korean peninsula has reached a phase of nuclear crisis beyond the Cold War era. The launch comes a day after North Korea threatened to take military action against the U.S. for allegedly intruding on its airspace. Professor Yang Mu-jin at the University of North Korean Studies in Seoul interpreted the launch as a message of warning against the deployment of a U.S. nuclear ballistic submarine in South Korea. This comes as North Korea on Thursday also accused the U.S. of plotting to use nuclear weapons against the regime under the Washington Declaration, which includes enhanced deployment of U.S. strategic assets in South Korea. Experts also say the launch was the regime's attempt to make up for the failed launch of its spy satellite and to display its advancing missile technology prior to a widely anticipated large-scale military parade later this month. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Seoul Central Bank has shared intentions to keep its benchmark interest rate unchanged at 3.5%, taking into account a host of economic variables. Our finance correspondent Lee Dae-yeon reports.
The Bank of Korea has frozen its key interest rate for the fourth consecutive time. The central bank announced a decision following Thursday's Monetary Policy Committee meeting. With the rate freeze, the figure stays at 3.5%.
Inflation is expected to remain above the target level, and we still need to monitor the monetary policies of major countries and the household debt situation too. The Board of Governors voted unanimously to maintain the current tightening stance.
The BOK began raising the base rate in August 2021 when it decided to normalize the rate, which had been significantly lower due to COVID-19. But the base rate has remained at 3.5% since February. Concerns over the economy were the major factor behind the BOK's decision. However, it's still uncertain whether South Korea's economy will see a rebound in the second half of this year as the country awaits recovery in exports and domestic consumption. The Finance Ministry earlier this month lowered this year's economic growth outlook from 1.6 to 1.4%. The Bank of Korea also lowered its forecast to 1.4% amid sluggish recovery for the IT sector and the underwhelming impact of China's post-COVID reopening. The reason concerns over record-high delinquency rates against loans with the Korea Federation of Community Credit Cooperatives is another factor behind the decision. The cooperative has been struggling with liquidity woes and bank runs due to the soaring loan defaults, which are causing anxiety in the financial market. The country is also seeing a slowing trend of consumer price rises, with the inflation rate last month dropping to the 2% range for the first time in almost 2 years. Meanwhile, following the BOK's decision to hold the rate, the interest rate difference between South Korea and the U.S. stays at 1.75 percentage points. But as widely expected in the market, if the U.S. Fed decides to take a so-called baby step, raising its rates by 25 basis points, the rate difference would widen to 2 percentage points, a record-high figure. This unprecedented rate gap means tough times ahead with heavy pressure on foreign capital outflow and a weakening won against the U.S. dollar. Lee Dae-yeon, Arirang News.
Korea's ICT industry noted a trade surplus of some $4.6 billion in June, despite an overall decline in exports. According to the Trade Ministry on Thursday, the total value of tech exports last month amounted to over $16 billion, down over 22% on year, amid sluggish demand and a base effect as Korea posted record ICT exports last June. By product, chip exports plunged nearly 28%, while displays fell over 11%. In the U.S., price pressures continue to ease, with inflation standing at 3% in June. And this reality is fueling widespread speculation over the Federal Reserve's future rate policy. Our Ising-jae explains.
As the U.S. Consumer Price Index slowed faster than expected in June, expectations are growing that the end is near for U.S. Federal Reserve interest rate hikes. According to U.S. Department of Labor on Wednesday, June CPI rose 3.0% from the same month last year, slightly below the market forecast of 3.1%. The latest figures show that the country's inflation had shrank by a third since the June 2022 CPI showed a 9.1% rise compared to the same month the previous year. The June core CPI, which excludes volatile food and energy prices, rose 4.8% from a year ago, but was again below the market consensus of 5%. While some believe that the faster-than-expected slowdown in the country's inflation means that the U.S. Central Bank will impose a final hike in July instead of the 2 more rate hikes this year that policymakers had previously hinted, others are more cautious. They say that because core CPI is still in the 4% range, which is twice the U.S. Fed's target of 2%, the central bank could go ahead with 2 more rate hikes this year. Still, investors seem to be optimistic over the latest CPI figures as U.S. stocks and treasuries rallied while the U.S. dollar tumbled. Wall Street's benchmark S&P 500 stock index on Wednesday closed 0.7% higher, marking its highest level since April 2022, while the tech-heavy Nasdaq rose 1.2% on the day. Traders expect the U.S. Fed to pause its rate hike after a 25 basis point rate hike in July, putting the country's key interest rate in the 5.25 to 5.5% range. Ising-jae, Arirang News.
Korea's southern resort island is currently hosting its 46th Jeju Forum, with corporate leaders and government authorities, as well as relevant scholars, taking part in talks to bolster the economy. Our business correspondent Shin Ha-young is there.
The nation and its companies are focusing on economic recovery as the country has entered the second half of the year. The largest annual summer business forum, known as the Jeju Forum and hosted by the Korea Chamber of Commerce and Industry, kicked off on Wednesday on the southern resort island of Jeju. Industry insiders, academic experts, and government officials are all participating to address the rapidly changing domestic and global economic environment and share business strategies. At the opening ceremony, the chairman of the KCCI, Choi Tae-won, who is also the chairman of SK Group, emphasized the importance of entering new global markets amid ongoing geopolitical risks.
The Chinese market was South Korea's top market, but nowadays it is necessary to replace it with new emerging markets. Hosting the 2030 World Expo in Busan helps us to do so by allowing us to engage with countries from around the world and seek new markets.
As the first speaker, Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho assessed the country's economy under a global economic slowdown and at a time of uncertainties. In particular, he pointed to the sluggish chip industry, a surge in household debt, and a decline in productivity due to the shrinking population as factors. He also introduced the government's policy direction that will stimulate South Korea's economy.
There are still remaining uncertainties. As part of short-term responses, the government will focus on improving the country's economic vitality and stabilizing people's livelihoods. In the long term, it will improve the country's fundamental economic structure.
Throughout the forum, Bank of Korea Governor Lee Chang-yong will analyze the current global economic situation and offer advice to help aid South Korea's economic rebound. AI could play its part too, and participants at the forum can learn about the latest trends and how AI can be used in a positive way. 550 representatives of businesses from across the country have gathered here under the theme Insight and Healing from Jeju Island. And the 4-day event will run until Saturday. 신하영, Arirang News, Jeju.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In Italy, at least one person has died amid soaring temperatures. The rising mercury is part of a heatwave named Cerberus after the mythological three-headed dog. High temperatures are expected to continue for 2 weeks, and a new heatwave called Charon is set to replace Cerberus on Friday. The heat waves are threatening to top Italy's previous high of 48.8 degrees Celsius, set in August 2021 in Sicily. Other countries, including Spain, France and Greece, could see temperatures surpass 40 degrees. Several tourists in Italy have collapsed from the heat, and people are being urged to stay hydrated and to avoid drinking caffeine or alcohol. Now, the European Union has passed a law aimed at restoring damaged ecosystems. The Nature Restoration Law was passed in the EU Parliament in Brussels on Wednesday, with 336 votes in favour and 300 against. It means that countries in the bloc will need to restore 20% of the EU's natural land and sea ecosystems by 2030. It comes as Europe has seen a decline in its natural habitats, 81% of which have been determined to be in poor condition. The law was fiercely opposed by right-wing parties who say that it would harm farmers and risk food security. The bill's text will now be negotiated before a final agreement is reached. In more good news for nature, Colombia says that deforestation across the country fell 29% in 2022 compared to the previous year, while deforestation of its part of the Amazon rainforest dropped by 26%. Announced by the Colombian government on Wednesday, it's the lowest level of deforestation since 2013. Just over 1,200 square kilometers of forest was cut down, roughly 220,000 football fields. It's down from the 2021 total deforestation figure of 1,700 square kilometers. The drop was credited to paying local communities to protect forests and to criminal investigations launched against anyone suspected of financing deforestation. And finally, the 75th Primetime Emmy Awards announced its list of nominations on Wednesday. The drama Succession led the pack with 27 nominations, including those for Best Drama, Lead Actress, and even 3 of its cast tipped for Lead Actor. Not far behind was the video game adaptation Last of Us at 24 nominations. It was followed by Season 2 of White Lotus with 23 nominations. The awards show is considered the TV equivalent to the Oscars and honors the best in American primetime television over the past year. The winners will be announced on September 19th. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. We need to brace for massive monsoon rainfall starting this afternoon. Central regions will receive 30 to 80 millimeters an hour of very heavy rain. Then certain parts of the country will get downpours tomorrow. The capital area could see up to 250 millimeters of showers into tomorrow. The rest of the country could see more than 200 millimeters of downpours. Those in the capital will be soaked by heavy rain around mid-afternoon and after midnight. A rain advisory could be expanded to the whole country, with a preliminary rain advisory being issued, except on Jeju Island, where heat wave warnings remain in place. Temperatures will not rise much today, with most parts seeing figures in the mid to upper 20s this afternoon. Now, this year's rainy season seemed to be wetter and heavier, and you might be wondering when this monsoon season will come to an end. Well, for now, we are forecasting that the monsoonal front will stay with us through next week. Stay alert and safe. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
Right, and those are the headlines at this hour. Thank you for watching.
Mabuhay. I am the Ambassador of the Philippines to the Republic of Korea, Teresa Dizon de Vega. As Korea moves into a more active and engaged position as a global pivotal state, and with the growing influence of Korea in many fields, not just the economy, but also in innovation, in digitalization, in saving the environment, and of course in creative content. Arirang TV has been a very important platform for bringing news and information about Korea to the rest of the world, and also as a platform for talking about and discussing and engaging with other countries and talking about Korea's bilateral relations with the Philippines and with the greater global community. As we move towards a new era after the pandemic, we look forward to more active engagement, to more information, to more opportunities for discussion as Korea, the Philippines, and the rest of the world build a better and safer normal. Resonating with the world, Arirang.
Are you kidding me? Just go to her place, man.
합의를 하게 해줘야지.
얼마나 럭티나 보자. 죽었어.
Italy, contour, India, the United Kingdom, New Zealand. Woo!
I'm excited. You excited?
Of course.
Yeah.
Music, start.
Lotte takes a new leap beyond its boundaries. Our change will lead to better lives for all. New Lotte, the power of a better world. New today, better tomorrow. Lotte.
A popular sugar substitute is slated to be declared a possible carcinogen this coming Friday by the World Health Organization, prompting rampant public concerns and industry efforts for countermeasures. So what is aspartame and its potential health effects? What are health experts and regulators beyond the WHO saying? And what has been the response from the food and drink industry? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. Today we address the fresh scrutiny on the potential health implications of aspartame. For more on this, I have Dr. David Kwok from Sooncheng University here in the studio with us. Dr. Kwok, it's been a while. Welcome back.
It has been a while. Thanks for having me.
I also have Kwon So with us. Well, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
Right, so then we'll begin with you. Let's start off with some background information behind the fresh scrutiny over the health implications of aspartame.
Right, aspartame, one of the world's most common and popular artificial sweeteners that you find in your daily Diet Coke as a replacement for sugar, is being reviewed for its safety or even potential link to cancer. The sweetener has been used and approved by global food regulators for decades. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has given the safety green light 5 times since 1981, and over 90 countries around the world are approving the use as well, including Korea. However, its safety has been controversial for years as well, with some studies suggesting that people consuming larger amounts of artificial sweeteners having had an increased risk of cancer. The World Health Organization decided to take a closer look at aspartame and its potential health risks. On July 14th, so Friday, 2 reports are expected to be published, one by the World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer and one by the WHO's Joint Expert Committee on Food Additives. The food and beverage industry is watching closely as the assessment could have huge impacts on future production. Aspartame is the ingredient in diet sodas like Coke Zero Sugar, Diet Coke, Sprite Zero, Pepsi Zero Sugar, Mountain Dew Zero Sugar, and so forth. And also it's the ingredient in other items such as ice cream, chewing gum, sugar-free jam, yogurt, cough drops, and even in toothpaste. Meanwhile, the WHO earlier this year, in a separate guideline on non-sugar sweeteners, advised not to use aspartame for weight control, suggesting there aren't any long-term benefits in terms of reducing body fat, and moreover mentioning the potential risk of undesirable effects such as an increased risk of type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, and also mortality in adults.
Right, and staying with that, Dr. Kwok, perhaps speaking as a scholar yourself and a doctor, could you tell us a bit more about aspartame and its potential health effects?
Well, so I just pretty much gave us a very good review of it. Aspartame, as we all know now, is an artificial sweetener, mostly used in carbonated drinks and something that is rather cold than warm. I want to iterate that fact because there are other types of artificial sweeteners that serves the same purpose, except it's being used in other types of food sources, such as something that could become hot, such as in bakeries and etc. Now, health effects, there have been many studies that try to review either how beneficial it would be to human beings or it wouldn't be. There have been many speculations. There have been reviews that actually review correlation of artificial sweetener, not particularly aspartame, to people having dementia, which found a very mild correlation. So let me also emphasize that fact. But there have also been studies that correlated uses of aspartame to possible cancer occurrences. Now, all these reviews are rather not thorough in a sense that it's sporadic. It's not something that's definitely depicting on strong correlation between aspartame and what we're currently worried about, the cancer. So I think it's rather early at this point to make a complete decision on what to consider aspartame, but rather judging from our many years of use with aspartame already, there have not been that many cases of actual cancer solely due to aspartame. So I think it's more important clinically that we take away point from that factor.
Right, I see. And before we move forward, Dr. Kwak, could you tell us a bit about, because you spoke about the presence of other sugar substitutes, and that being said, how does aspartame perhaps differ from sucralose, I believe?
Right, so sucralose is yet another type of artificial sweetener. As I mentioned just briefly earlier, the biggest difference between sucralose and aspartame is the fact that it has differences in sustainability in heat. So aspartame is known to sustain better in cold as opposed to sucralose being sustained better in the heat. So it's more often used in bakeries and other products that goes through heat for processing, as opposed to aspartame being used rather in cold drinks and etc. Now, there is also a couple of other differences. The biggest of those is the fact that aspartame is about 200 times sweeter than the regular sugar, as opposed to sucralose being about 600 times being sweeter than sugar. So its usage of dosages in regular products would differ by that much as well. Meaning, if I were to consume aspartame, calculating the differences in proportion between sucralose and aspartame, if I want to get the same level of sweetness, I would probably use about 3 times as much of aspartame than sucralose. But that's not really totally being realistic because they're currently being used in different purposes.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, so with regard to aspartame, the World Health Organization is poised to make public its findings on Friday. That would be July 14th, that is tomorrow. What are we expecting?
Well, Sunny, according to an exclusive by Reuters late last month, the International Agency for Research on Cancer is expected to label aspartame as possibly carcinogenic to humans. And that will translate into the existence of evidence linking the sweetener to cancer, but that evidence being limited. So let's take a look at how the WHO's cancer research arm, the IARC, categorizes carcinogenicity. So here you can see 5 groups. So the first group, group 1, says carcinogenic to humans. So that would mean a substance that there is enough evidence to conclude that a substance can cause cancer in humans. Then we have group 2A, which says probably carcinogenic to humans when there's strong evidence that a substance can cause cancer in humans, but if there is not conclusive, if it's not conclusive as of present. Then group 2B says possibly carcinogenic to humans in the case there is some evidence that a substance or agent can cause cancer in humans, but at present it is far from conclusive. And this group is what we're expecting to be categorized for aspartame. Group 3, in group 3, that means there is no evidence at present that a substance can cause cancer in humans, and Group 4 means there is strong evidence that a substance does not cause cancer in humans. So as I said again, Group 2B is what we're expecting regarding aspartame based on the leaked information cited in the media. So you might be wondering what else is on the list of Group 2B. There would be diesel, talc, nickel, infection with HIV type 2, working with asphalt, and I also believe that working too much was categorized as that as well. But also Asian-style pickled vegetables, including Korea's famous side dish kimchi, bracken ferns, and aloe vera are also said to be in this category. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're expecting 2 reports on Friday, one being the one by the IARC, with the main focus being on whether the sugar substitute is a carcinogen or a cancer-causing substance or not. And the other report by the Joint Expert Committee on Food Additives is expected to provide a guidance on the appropriate daily intake of aspartame. Because in many cases of substances that have the ability to cause cancer, it really depends on the amount that you consume for it really to be carcinogenic.
Right, and before we talk about the amount, Dr. Kwak, I understand talk about Asian pickled vegetables being linked to the risk of gastric cancer, I believe, has been around for quite a while. What more can you tell us about this?
Right. So the correlation of Asian pickled foods versus cancer has actually been proven, and there have been many thorough reviews which proves up to about 50 to even almost 100% that it could cause more occurrences of cancers in people. But it is very different from what we are discussing today, because there have also been made so I'm trying to find the appropriate word here, but possibly speculation of what would cause it. It's namely what's called nitrate and nitrites. It's the byproducts of preservatives and cooking processing that gets used in preservation of these pickled foods. Once consumed in human beings, going through the very harsh acidity in the stomach, it becomes what's called nicotinamide. I'm forgetting the word. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sorry about that. So the nicotinamide is actually a very strong carcinogen, and that's what is directly related to cancer-causing carcinogens. But however, the nitrite and nitrate, because it's rather indirectly correlated for the time being, that puts this Asian pickled food category under 2B instead of anything above. However, as Soa also mentioned, the terminology, the keyword ADL, the appropriate daily intake is very, very important, because these categories do not care about how much we have to consume in order to be able to even possibly get cancer. So, for example, the ADI for aspartame is currently at about 50 milligrams per kilogram of human body weight, as guided by FDA. That means per FDA, if I were to consume the maximum level of aspartame allowed, today, I would have to take about 40 kilograms of the powder. So in regular dosages, as we consume in beverages, it is nowhere near being considered for being carcinogens.
Right, I see. Dr. Kwak, what can you tell us about the classification that the WHO has with regard to carcinogenicity, which is something that Soa shared earlier on?
Right, so it was already reviewed, but it classifies these categories into being completely non-carcinogenic, then probably carcinogenic, and possibility of being carcinogenic, and no way of being carcinogenic. So these categories, if officially placing a food sources by the WHO in any of the categories, obviously would stir up the whole general takes of these foods, and people will become very scared to further consume these products. But as I just mentioned earlier, it doesn't regard anything at all for the amount of these resources that a person has to take in. So it's rather debatable whether or not these categories are appropriately placing these resources into each of them.
Right, I see. This is an impromptu question, but Dr. Kwak, we are told, and do correct me if I'm wrong, we're told that the sun causes skin cancer. Is that a fact that we can all agree on?
Yes.
And if that is the case, though, we don't avoid the sun entirely.
Right.
Can I link that to the idea of consuming aspartame then?
Yes, and partially, I would like to say, because also from the sun, we try to protect ourselves by putting sunscreens on. So if now we know that aspartame has some sort of a relationship to causing cancer, obviously people would start to take measures to be careful in trying not to consume too much of it.
Right, so there would be more cautious consumption with regard to aspartame, I see. So authorities here in Korea, I believe, they've also responded to recent concerns over aspartame, right?
Right. South Korea's Ministry of Food and Drug Safety said it plans to carry out its own assessment regarding the potential health risks concerning aspartame once the WHO-led results are released. However, as I mentioned before, Korea, just like the US FDA, has been approving the substance for years, and authorities and experts here are being cautious for now as the issue could overly raise unnecessary phobia. And this has been with us since 1965. That's when it's been detected or found. And as I said, since the 1980s, it's been approved in many countries for consumption. Now, also the ministry released some figures that showed the average South Korean's intake of the sweetener is 0.12% of the acceptable daily intake that Dr. Kwak also mentioned earlier. So the ADI is a measure of the amount of a specific substance that can be ingested on a daily basis over a lifetime without being exposed to health risk. A ministry official said in order for the amount of aspartame intake to reach the ADI, an adult weighing 60 kilograms would have to drink 33 750 milliliter bottles of makgeolli every day, which is traditional Korean rice wine. And other comparisons made were 55 cans of 250 milliliter zero sugar sodas and 300 bags of chips a day. We will have to wait and see what the government's response will look like once Friday's reports are out, but it would require several producers from local regulators before changing any rules to aspartame consumption. So there won't be any direct results in Korea soon. And there might be no regulations at all, as we had a previous case in 2015 when the IARC announced processed meat and red meat as being carcinogenic and probably be carcinogenic. So local regulators back then, they did conduct their own separate assessments, but did not implement additional tightenings regarding the consumption of those processed meats.
Right, and talking about consumption, I suppose the risk of cancer then with regard to aspartame would be if you took quite a heavy dose of aspartame every day then.
Yes.
That being said then, Dr. Kwak, is there a completely safe sugar substitute?
Well, it's hard for me to actually come up with an alternative chemical to aspartame. Aspartame currently is probably safer than other sweeteners in a sense that it doesn't bring up sugar level once consumed. So the other sweeteners we just briefly talked about, they are currently found to still bring up the sugar level. It used to be that diabetic people took drinks with other sweeteners so that they could manage and contain their blood sugar level while still drinking the sweetened drinks. Except nowadays it's found that those drinks still bring up the sugar level somewhat. It's not totally 100% as if they drank a sugar-rated water, but they still bring up about 17 to about 20%. Now, that being said, aspartame-sweetened drinks, they do not. So I think for the time being, it has its own pros and cons. The pros is obviously the easily usabilities in soft drinks and whatnot. Cons, I guess, the newer studies that are coming up with all these different information. So I do not disagree with the fact that we should be careful and be more conservative in taking in these newly developed substances, even though aspartame isn't. It's I think, realistically speaking, drinking in the amount that we're currently consuming is perfectly fine.
Right, I see. And moving forward, so how is the food and drink industry here in Korea responding to these concerns? You mentioned makgeolli earlier on. I had no idea that aspartame went into makgeolli.
There is. I actually haven't thought about it either. But food and beverage companies were really quick to respond, regardless of the reports having been made official yet, including a likely recommendation for daily intake. So already some manufacturers have declared to take out the ingredient of their products. Others vowed to find an alternative. So makgeolli makers, for instance, are looking into various measures to address the situation, with Seoul Jangsu, a makgeolli producer that accounts for some 40% of the traditional Korean alcohol, or also referred to as rice wine, saying it will take joint actions with makgeolli producers if aspartame is classified as a carcinogen, and is also considering changes to their recipes. Now, CU, a major convenience store, already introduced an aspartame-free makgeolli last week. It's only made out of water, rice, and fermentation starter. And top confectionery brands like Arirang and Crown Hete have also taken preemptive actions to substitute aspartame. And pharmaceutical companies have also started discussions on potentially using alternatives to aspartame, as their fever-reducing syrups for children, for instance, contain aspartame as well. Following the news on the forecasted reports on the sweeteners, some companies were also quick to make clear that their products actually are aspartame-free. For instance, Coca-Cola Korea, Haight Jilo, which is a famous soju maker, Lotte Well Food, all announced that none of their products include aspartame. Kwangdong Pharmaceuticals, the producer of vitamin drinks Vita 500 and Vita 500 Zero, also stressed its beverages are aspartame-free. The fast move from the industry apparently is a prevention from drastically dropping sales, as the IARC report could directly lead to such results. Despite experts and authorities' suggestions to not overly react to a new assessment, at first a negative public perception may be difficult to avoid, at least in the short term. And some pundits are actually also concerned over long-term effects, because immediately sugar-free drinks that do not contain aspartame, they might be having benefits from this. However, in the long term, it could have a negative impact on the zero-sugar market as a whole.
Right. And beyond aspartame, Dr. Kwak, Soa earlier mentioned the link between red meat and the risk of cancer. Now, I find myself going to restaurants and asking for my steak to be done medium rare. How worried should I be?
I'm not going to worry you with the information, hopefully, but NHS from the UK actually has a formal guideline on people who consume too much of red meat products, such as that from beef, lamb, and pork. They should, if they're consuming anything above 90 grams after cooking, should reduce it down to 70 grams or less, because there had been proven correlation between red meats and colorectal cancer. And that has been studied over and over, which proves the same thing. So red meat, if consumed too much and eccentrically, such as a non-balanced diet, do have the danger of causing cancer, so we should be careful. But once again, the main point is that we should have rather a balanced diet, which has proportional constituents of each of the ingredients, except just complete meat-only meals.
Right, and of course, going back to the idea of cautious consumption then, with regard to meat as well as aspartame. Dr. Kwak, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Soa, thank you for your insights.
Thank you, as always.
Right, well, that brings us to the end of this edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow. That is Friday.